Vanishing point perspective is a great way to give depth and a sense of three-dimensionality to your otherwise flat and 2D pixel art scenes. And the best thing about it, it's not so complicated to do it yourself once you understand the basic principles behind it. So let's have a look. So what actually is a vanishing point? A vanishing point in your pixel art scene is a point where certain lines in your image meet to create the illusion for the viewer of observing an actual three-dimensional scene. In general, you can create your image using only one vanishing point, or two vanishing points, or even three different vanishing points. Okay, but how exactly do you determine how many vanishing points you should use in your image, and also which lines exactly do meet in which of those vanishing points? Let's start with the most simple case in which we only have one vanishing point. So if this is your scene and this is the horizon line of the scene, then the vanishing point needs to be placed somewhere on that horizon line, for example here. If we then have a 3D object in the scene like this, you see that those lines here are parallel to the 2D canvas, which you can also refer to as the 2D image plane. The remaining sets of lines for the object here then go into the depth of the scene, which means that they eventually all meet in the vanishing point on the horizon line. If we follow this basic principle with the front face of the object being parallel to the 2D image plane and the lines of the remaining faces of the object converging in the vanishing point, we also get the nice effect that objects that are further away from the viewer automatically end up being smaller in our 2D image plane. But how does this work now for scenes with more than one vanishing point? To understand this, let's look at this scene here from an outside perspective. Imagine that you are now a different viewer of the scene which observes the previous viewer. The scene then may look something like this. So we still have our two objects here and the viewer from before is standing somewhere around here. This viewer is looking at the scene through the canvas of the image, or in other words, through a 2D image plane such as this one. You can imagine it like a window that is fixed in front of the viewer's eye and which can move around with the viewer in the scene. So what we saw now for one vanishing point was that these lines here were parallel to the 2D image plane, as well as those lines. So what happens now if the viewer rotates a bit and looks into another direction, like this? What happens to the lines of the objects in the image plane then? As you can see, this set of lines here is still unchanged, which means those lines are still parallel to the image plane. However, this set of lines now is no longer parallel to the image plane. So instead of one set of lines not being parallel as before, we now have two sets of lines not being parallel to the image plane. And this means that we also now have two vanishing points instead of one for those two sets of lines. From the viewer's perspective, this then looks something like this. Now what happens if the viewer looks up a little bit, like this? Then no more sets of lines are parallel to the image plane. Or in other words, three sets of lines are not parallel, which means that we require three distinct vanishing points to draw this situation correctly. Again, from the viewer's perspective, this then looks something like this, when the viewer is looking up a bit, or like this, when the viewer is looking down on the object. And with these simple techniques I created, for example, this image. Now, a little quiz. Can you spot how many vanishing points I used here for this image? I actually mentioned it already in the beginning of this video, but do you maybe now also see how to determine the number of vanishing points for a scene like this? Right. You just look at the sets of lines that form the objects in the scene and you will notice that there is this one set of lines here that is parallel to the image plane, whereas the other set of lines are not. So in this case I use two vanishing points, namely here and here. Another example is this scene, which I created earlier. Can you see how many vanishing points I used here? I give you a little moment. And if you want to see if you are right, then you can check out this video where you will get the answer to that question.